Yes, Your Honor.
You're torn between the two men your entire life, believing he was your dad.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia is suing to prove he is your biological father. You searched for your daughter for more than 25 years. That Ms. Ames is your daughter.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes.
After raising your daughter and paying more than $40,000 in child support, Mr. Garcia was claiming Ms. Ames.
We found each other on Facebook last year, and we met at my mother's house.
Like, I needed some resolution to it. Take you back. My mother died when I was 13 years old. There was a possibility of another man being my father whatsoever. Another relative of mine decided to tell me that your dad isn't your dad. So the name that they gave me, I searched for years. Well, come to find out, they had gave me the wrong name.
She walked into the courtroom carrying 30 years of questions on her shoulders, questions that had followed her quietly through childhood, adolescence, and into adulthood without ever being answered. Her name was Tanira Ames, and for her entire life she believed she knew exactly who her father was. John Patton was the man listed on her birth certificate, the man who paid child support, the man who showed up at milestones, signed papers, and stood in places where a father is expected to stand. Even when their relationship was strained, even when arguments created distance, he was still her father in every way she understood the word. No one ever told her otherwise. For 30 years she thought she KN. Her mother passed away when Tanira was only 13 years old, taking with her any explanations that might have existed. For years after that, Tanira lived with certainty, even if that certainty sometimes felt uncomfortable. Then, when she was 21, a relative said something that cracked her world open. It wasn't said gently or carefully. It was simply dropped into her life like a secret that had waited too long to be spoken. She was told there was a possibility that John Patton was not her biological father, that another man might be. No proof, no context, just a name. Tanira searched for that name for years, but nothing came of it. Eventually, she assumed the information was wrong or meaningless, another rumor that didn't deserve space in her life. Then, nearly a decade later, a friend request appeared on Facebook. The name was different from the one she had been given years earlier, but the face stopped her cold. She looked at his picture and felt something she couldn't explain. The resemblance was undeniable. His eyes looked like hers. His features mirrored her own. His family photos felt strangely familiar. When she accepted the request, he asked a simple question. Did she know who he was? She answered honestly. She said she had heard there was a possibility he might be her father. His response was immediate. He said he wanted to meet her. He was in New Jersey. He had been looking for her for years. That man was Ramon Garcia. For more than 25 years, he had believed he had a daughter somewhere in the world. From the moment Tanira was born, he felt she was his. He said he rocked her as a baby, held her, stayed with her grandmother, worked, and tried to take responsibility. But at some point, Tanira's mother told him the baby was not his, that John Patton was the father. Even then, Ramon never let go of the belief that Tanira was his child. He searched quietly, asked relatives, made calls, and waited for a chance to find her. When social media finally gave him that opportunity, he took it without hesitation. When they met for the first time, Tanira was 9 months pregnant. The meeting was emotional, overwhelming, and immediate in its intensity. There was no awkwardness, no distance. She felt an instant bond with him, something she hadn't planned for and couldn't explain away. They talked for hours. He learned for the first time that her mother had passed away years earlier. Together, they went to her mother's grave, a moment heavy with grief and lost time. Ramon delayed his return to Florida so he could stay longer, so he could meet his granddaughter when she was born. For Tanira, this wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about understanding herself, about knowing the truth so she could give clarity to her own children. She came to court torn in a way few people ever have to be. On one side stood John Patton, the man who raised her, paid over $40,000 in child support, showed proof of every payment, and never walked away from his responsibilities. On the other side stood Ramon Garcia, a man who believed he had been denied the chance to raise his child and had waited decades for the truth to come out. Both men stood there convinced. Both men believed, without hesitation, that Tanira was their daughter. Tanira explained how confusing it was to love both of them. John Patton had been at her wedding. He signed her marriage certificate. He was present when it mattered, even when their relationship had ups and downs. Ramon, despite only knowing her for a year, had shown up fully. He spent time with her family, went on vacation with her, built a relationship with her husband and children. She didn't want to lose either of them. She didn't want answers to erase love. She just needed the truth, because living in uncertainty was no longer an option. Both men were asked again if they were sure. John Patton said yes without hesitation. Ramon Garcia said yes with equal certainty. The room held its breath as the DNA results were prepared. When the answer finally came, it confirmed that Ramon Garcia was Tanira's biological father. The truth, once spoken, did not destroy what already existed. Instead, it reshaped it. Tanira cried, not from loss, but from relief. She finally knew. John Patton did not walk away. He made it clear that biology would not erase decades of love, sacrifice, and fatherhood. Tanira stood between them, physically and emotionally, and both men moved closer, meeting her where she stood. That moment closed one chapter of confusion, but it opened another story entirely, one where truth and love were no longer in competition. On the same day, in the same courtroom, another story unfolded, equally tangled and emotionally charged. A young man named Corey Lloyd came forward seeking clarity about a 1.5-year-old little girl named Courtney. He believed she was his first child, a belief that had shaped his choices, his emotions, and his sense of responsibility. He had stepped up when he was told the baby was his, prepared himself for fatherhood, and tried to build a future around that identity. The child's mother, Shantia Riley, told a different story. She insisted Corey was not the biological father. She said she had been involved with another man, Curtis Grimes, around the same time. According to her, the timeline pointed to Curtis, not Corey. Yet her actions over the months told a confusing story. She allowed Corey to believe he was the father, reassured him, involved him emotionally, then later pulled that certainty away. Corey left at one point, overwhelmed and hurt, only to be called back again when doubts resurfaced. Curtis Grimes, watching from a distance, carried his own doubts. Courtney had his last name, yet he admitted he wasn't consistently present. He questioned the situation openly, frustrated that another man seemed more involved with a child who supposedly belonged to him. Corey, meanwhile, felt the weight of possibly losing the only child he had ever known as his own. He spoke about noticing similarities, small things like mannerisms, birthmarks, and habits that convinced him she was his daughter. The courtroom filled with tension, frustration, and raw emotion as contradictions surfaced. Both men had been pulled into uncertainty by the same woman, and both were desperate for clarity. When the DNA results were finally revealed, the truth came out clearly. Corey Lloyd was the biological father of Courtney. The relief on his face was immediate. The pain, arguments, and confusion finally gave way to certainty. In both stories, the truth did not come easily. It arrived after years of silence, mistakes, and emotional damage. But once revealed, it gave everyone a chance to move forward, to redefine relationships not just by biology, but by love, accountability, and honesty. After the results were read and the initial emotions settled, the courtroom slowly returned to a quieter rhythm, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. Tanira stood there absorbing a truth that had taken 3 decades to reach her. Knowing who her biological father was did not erase her past. Instead, it gave shape to it. She spoke about her children and how important this moment was for them. She didn't want them growing up with unanswered questions, with uncertainty about who they came from or where they belonged. Her need for truth was never about rejecting the man who raised her, but about completing a puzzle that had always felt unfinished. John Patton listened carefully. He had carried the title of father for 30 years, not because of DNA, but because of responsibility. He had paid every dollar of child support without complaint. He had shown up when it counted, even when their relationship was strained. Hearing that he was not her biological father did not undo what he had done. He made it clear without bitterness that he was still her father. Not on paper, not by science, but by choice and commitment. That kind of bond could not be taken away by a test result. Ramon Garcia, standing nearby, felt both vindicated and humbled. The DNA confirmed what he had believed for decades, but it also confronted him with the reality of lost time. He spoke about wishing he had known sooner, wishing he had been allowed to be there in ways he never got the chance to be. Still, he was grateful. Grateful to finally know the truth, grateful to have a relationship with his daughter now, and grateful that love had room to exist on both sides. Tanira did not have to choose. She did not have to lose anyone in order to gain the truth. As the first case concluded, the courtroom prepared itself for another emotionally charged story, one involving a much younger child and adults still trying to figure out their roles. Corey Lloyd stepped forward carrying hope mixed with fear. Courtney was only a year and a half old, but to him, she already represented everything. He believed she was his daughter, his first child, and that belief had shaped his sense of identity as a man and a potential father. When Shansha Riley told him she was pregnant, he was excited. He didn't run. He didn't deny responsibility. He embraced it. But almost immediately, doubt entered the picture. Corey knew Shansha had recently ended another relationship. He was aware of Curtis Grimes, the other man involved. Still, he chose trust. He chose to believe what he was told. When Shansha reassured him that he was the father, Corey committed emotionally. He imagined a future that included Courtney, even as confusion and contradictions began to surface. Shansha's story shifted over time. At one point, she told Corey the baby was his. Later, she said the dates didn't add up. She explained timelines involving the Super Bowl, conception windows, and doctor visits, trying to justify why Corey could not be the biological father. Yet even as she pushed him away, she pulled him back in. She allowed him to see Courtney. She let him bond with her. Then she distanced him again. The emotional back and forth took its toll, leaving Corey confused, hurt, and desperate for clarity. Curtis Grimes entered the picture carrying his own doubts. Courtney had his last name, but he admitted he wasn't sure either. He spoke openly about feeling played, about seeing another man more involved with a child who supposedly belonged to him. He had other children to support, other responsibilities, and the uncertainty frustrated him deeply. Both men felt manipulated, stuck in a situation where neither could move forward without knowing the truth. Corey spoke about the small details that made him believe Courtney was his. The way she reacted during diaper changes, a birthmark that matched his own, the feeling he got when he held her. These weren't scientific facts, but they mattered to him. They were emotional anchors that kept him holding on. He made it clear that if Courtney was his, he would be there fully. If she wasn't, he would walk away, not out of anger, but because he needed to rebuild his life on truth, not confusion. Shansha, under pressure, expressed exhaustion. She said she was tired of being judged, tired of being pulled in two directions, tired of the chaos. She insisted she wanted the truth, not just for the men involved, but for herself and for her children. She admitted that mistakes had been made, but she wanted the situation to end. She wanted certainty, no matter what the outcome was. The courtroom atmosphere grew tense as the DNA results approached. Everyone understood that this test would change lives. For Corey, it meant either becoming a father or losing the child he had already emotionally claimed. For Curtis, it meant either accepting responsibility or stepping aside. For Shansha, it meant facing the consequences of the truth, whatever they might be. When the results were read, the answer was clear. Corey Lloyd was Courtney's biological father. The relief that washed over him was immediate and overwhelming. His belief, his hope, his emotional investment were validated. This wasn't just about biology. It was about knowing that the love he felt had a place to go. He didn't celebrate loudly. He didn't gloat. He simply absorbed the moment, understanding that his life had just taken a permanent turn. Curtis accepted the outcome with a mix of resignation and release. The uncertainty that had frustrated him was gone. He no longer had to question his role or fight for a place that wasn't his. The truth, even when difficult, gave him clarity. In both cases, the courtroom became a place where truth finally caught up with the past. These were not stories about winning or losing. They were stories about people living with unanswered questions, about love existing alongside doubt, and about the heavy cost of silence. The DNA results didn't erase pain, but they gave everyone a foundation to move forward. For Tanira, the truth allowed her to stand whole, no longer divided by uncertainty. For Courtney, the truth ensured she would grow up knowing exactly who her father was. And for the adults involved, the truth offered something rare and powerful. The chance to stop guessing and start living honestly, even if honesty came with consequences. As the courtroom slowly emptied and the noise faded, what remained was not applause or argument, but a heavy stillness filled with understanding. These cases were never just about DNA. They were about time lost, trust broken, love misplaced, and truth delayed. Everyone who stood in that room carried something with them that could not be measured by a test result alone. For Tanira, walking out of the courtroom felt different than walking in. For years, she had lived with questions she didn't even know how to ask. She had felt moments of disconnect, subtle feelings that something didn't fully line up, but she pushed them aside because life moved on and responsibilities came first. Now, with the truth finally spoken out loud, she felt a sense of peace she had never known. It wasn't the kind of peace that erased pain. It was the kind that allowed her to breathe without wondering. She thought about her children and how one day they would ask questions about where they came from. She would be able to answer them honestly. She would be able to tell them that families are not always simple, that love doesn't disappear just because the truth changes shape. She would be able to explain that sometimes people do the best they can with the information they have, and sometimes that isn't enough. John Patton walked out knowing that nothing could erase the years he had spent being a father. He had shown up when it mattered, not because he had to, but because he chose to. The courtroom result didn't take that away from him. If anything, it highlighted the difference between biology and commitment. He had been there for birthdays, for school years, for emotional moments when a child needed stability. That didn't disappear with a DNA envelope. Ramon Garcia left with mixed emotions. Joy, relief, and a quiet sadness lived side by side inside him. He finally had proof of what he had believed for decades, but proof also meant confronting everything he had missed. First steps he didn't see, school days he didn't attend, moments he could never get back. Still, he was grateful for what he had now. A chance to build something real, even if it came late. He wasn't asking to replace anyone. He just wanted a place in his daughter's life, and now he finally had that chance. In the second case, Corey Lloyd's life changed in an instant. For months, he had lived in emotional limbo, unsure whether the child he loved was truly his. He had prepared himself for loss, telling himself that if the result went the other way, he would walk away and start over. But when the truth confirmed what his heart had already believed, it grounded him. This wasn't just validation. It was responsibility becoming real. Corey knew that being Courtney's biological father didn't automatically make him a perfect parent. It meant showing up consistently, learning, sacrificing, and staying even when things became difficult. The test gave him certainty, but the future would require effort. He accepted that fully. This was no longer about proving anything. It was about becoming the father his daughter deserved. Curtis Grimes, though disappointed, also gained clarity. The uncertainty that had followed him was gone. He no longer had to question his place or wonder if he was failing a child that might not even be his. Truth allowed him to step back without guilt. It allowed him to focus on the children who did belong to him and the responsibilities he already carried. Shantia Riley faced perhaps the hardest truth of all. The results forced her to confront the consequences of confusion, mixed messages, and unresolved choices. While she expressed exhaustion and frustration, the truth also offered her an ending to chaos. No more guessing. No more emotional tug-of-war between two men. The clarity meant she could finally focus on building stability for her children, something that uncertainty had taken from everyone involved. Both stories shared the same lesson, even though the people and circumstances were different. Silence creates damage. Avoiding the truth does not protect anyone. Children grow up carrying the weight of secrets they didn't create, and adults are left cleaning up emotional wounds that could have healed sooner if honesty had come earlier. In that courtroom, science delivered answers, but it was the human reactions that mattered most. No one celebrated the truth as a victory. They accepted it as a responsibility. The truth didn't erase love. It didn't undo years of effort. It simply placed everything in its proper place. These were not stories with perfect endings. They were real endings, the kind that leave people changed instead of fixed. Tanira didn't lose a father. She gained understanding. Corey didn't win a child. He gained a lifelong commitment. And everyone involved left knowing that while the truth can arrive late, it is still powerful enough to change the future. As the doors closed behind them, each person stepped forward carrying something different than when they entered. Some carried relief. Some carried resolve. Some carried the quiet weight of lessons learned too late. But all of them carried certainty, and sometimes certainty is the greatest gift truth can offer. She walked into the courtroom carrying 30 years of questions on her shoulders, questions that had followed her quietly through childhood, adolescence, and into adulthood without ever being answered. Her name was Tanira Ames, and for her entire life she believed she knew exactly who her father was. John Patton was the man listed on her birth certificate, the man who paid child support, the man who showed up at milestones, signed papers, and stood in places where a father is expected to stand. Even when their relationship was strained, even when arguments created distance, he was still her father in every way she understood the word. No one ever told her otherwise. For 30 years she thought she KN. Her mother passed away when Tanira was only 13 years old, taking with her any explanations that might have existed. For years after that, Tanira lived with certainty, even if that certainty sometimes felt uncomfortable. Then, when she was 21, a relative said something that cracked her world open. It wasn't said gently or carefully. It was simply dropped into her life like a secret that had waited too long to be spoken. She was told there was a possibility that John Patton was not her biological father, that another man might be. No proof, no context, just a name. Tanira searched for that name for years, but nothing came of it. Eventually, she assumed the information was wrong or meaningless, another rumor that didn't deserve space in her life. Then, nearly a decade later, a friend request appeared on Facebook. The name was different from the one she had been given years earlier, but the face stopped her cold. She looked at his picture and felt something she couldn't explain. The resemblance was undeniable. His eyes looked like hers. His features mirrored her own. His family photos felt strangely familiar. When she accepted the request, he asked a simple question. Did she know who he was? She answered honestly. She said she had heard there was a possibility he might be her father. His response was immediate. He said he wanted to meet her. He was in New Jersey. He had been looking for her for years. That man was Ramon Garcia. For more than 25 years, he had believed he had a daughter somewhere in the world. From the moment Tanira was born, he felt